Good morning, everyone. Hi, hello, welcome. I'm Emma Sheard, the Head of Strategy for Insurance Nexus. We're just waiting whilst everyone signs in and logs in to the webinar. I hope everyone's had a good morning so far. There we go. There we go. I think most people now have gotten themselves sorted. So again, good morning and welcome. So again, I'm Emma from Insurance Nexus, and I am thrilled to welcome you this morning to our live webinar on how to build an innovation-ready foundation. Insurance is in the midst of such an exciting time with many opportunities unfolding, new technologies changing what's possible, and best of all, a dedication to transforming customer outcomes that is truly inspiring. But of course, realizing the potential of insurance is quite another matter and a real challenge considering the scale of the change that is required across most of the industry, which is, of course, why we're here today. So the webinar that's happening this morning is in the lead up to Connected Insurance USA, which we're proud to be hosting on November 28th and 29th in Chicago. And that's going to be a conference with 500 attendees and 2 full days of case studies, discussions, and learnings about the products, the people, and the technology that's required for insurance to meet and exceed customer expectations. For more details about joining that session, especially if you enjoy the webinar today, download the brochure link which we're sending around, or feel free to get in touch with me, and I'd love to have a chat with you about that in November. But as well, we've got all of the panelists who are very kindly giving us their time and thoughts today will also be speaking at Connected Insurance. So this is a great opportunity to kind of get the conversation started ahead of November, and for you to kind of get a bit of a sneak peek of what the 2 days will be like at the event. So without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce our panel who are with us this morning. Matt Zender, the Senior Vice President for Workers' Compensation Product at AmTrust. Scott Stevens, the Vice President of Underwriting for Workers' Compensation at AmTrust. Harry Stork, the Global Leader for Auto Liability at AIG. Michelle Russler, Strategy and Optimization Director from American Family. Brian Gabe, Strategy and Innovation for CSAA, and Jacqueline Ryan, the Vice President for Global Strategy at MetLife. First of all, I'd like to take a moment to thank our panel for their time and their insights. I'm sure the audience is as looking forward to it as I am. So let's get started. We're going to kick off with some opening remarks from our panel, and then please send through your questions through the system. We'll be doing a large Q&A portion, which is what this is all about, is getting answers to questions and kicking ideas around. So I'm going to hand it first to Matt and Scott from AmTrust. If you could please give us your thoughts, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Thank you, Emma, and I'm pleased to be speaking with you today, and looking forward to seeing many of you at the Connected Insurance USA Summit in Chicago. So with me on the phone today is my co-presenter, Scott Stevens, and in Chicago, he and I will be discussing underwriting in a digital age and the opportunities and challenges that those present. Scott heads up, as Emma mentioned, the Western U.S. work comp underwriting for AmTrust. So while we're in Chicago, we'll be drilling into the underwriting world, but today let's focus on one of the components of that, which is really becoming an innovation-ready company. And excuse me, from our perspective, we have 6 questions that position ourselves as an innovation-ready company, and you can ask yourselves the same questions. The first one that we ask is, do you know where you want to go, right? A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, but a successful journey begins with that goal in mind. And so when we look at that, we ask ourselves, are our innovation themes clear and relatable? Can we communicate them within the firm, both up and down? That's equally important. And lastly, on this topic, we ask ourselves, are they relevant, believable, and unique? You know, they have to be all 3 in order for this innovation theme to truly make an impact. It can be relevant, but if it's not believable and or unique, it doesn't particularly matter to us. Scott, what's next?
Thanks, Matt. Next up, we ask ourselves, do you know what tools and resources are available? That landscape changes every day, so you have to keep tab of existing and emerging technology. For example, Moore's Law, which defines that the number of transistors and a dense integrated circuit doubles every 2 years is estimated to become obsolete by 2025. Take APIs. They're the norm for now. 7 years ago, Facebook toasted their like 4,000th API. Today, there's almost 17,000 APIs documented on the web. Forbes calls this the API economy. Some of that energy and intellectual capital is moving into insurance and the insurtech space, and data, tools, and resources that were not available just 12 months ago can make a huge impact on our projects today. Matt?
Yeah, so a funny story about insurtech. I had a colleague who was at an insurtech conference, and he was approached by a scalper. A scalper at an insurance conference is absolutely something I never would have thought I'd seen. But it speaks to how quickly insurtech is becoming transformative within the industry, as Emma said in her opening comments. So additionally, once you've identified what resources may be available, it's critical to ask yourself, look, will business as usual trump when it comes time to allocate resources? Will you find yourself stringing a project along simply because you can't get it sort of quote unquote funded? Will you be, when you're standing in the proverbial buffet line of resources, does the operation that keeps the light on get the extra scoop of grub? So if the day-to-day operations can't be interrupted or forsaken, you're best off not attempting to become an innovation-ready firm.
Well said, Matt. But come on, the water's warm. Jump in. Seriously, once you've decided that you want to get into the space, you have to determine, are you prepared to scale or leap right in? A big, audacious goal may sound just fantastic and may get people excited, but if you can't break it out into scalable rungs, you will likely find yourself marching down that path forever without reaching that final objective. Don't be afraid to fail fast. That's way better than spinning your wheels over and over, grasping for the unattainable. Make mistakes. Additionally, the fifth question we would ask ourselves is, do we intend to beat the competition or become the standard that others are measured against? This can work as a question without any wrong answer at all. It's good to know where you land on the spectrum, though. Are you striving to pummel the competition into submission, or do you want to become the new gold standard? Frankly, either works. One requires probably first mover advantage, whereas the other can actually benefit from last mover advantage. Can you afford to not participate, though, or to let this pass you by? We can't if we intend to remain competitive.
Yeah, so Scott's right. You really do have to be willing to make mistakes and even fail. Sometimes, ready, fire, aim is an axiom that should be accepted, especially with the pace of transformation that's taking place today. So in concluding, the last question that we'd ask ourselves is, look, are people motivated to do it again? Creating innovation once can almost happen by happenstance and sheer will. But to do this over and over and over and truly be an innovation-ready firm requires that your team can taste success and is hungry to see it again. It requires measuring your results, sharing those results, really creating cascading targets that can foster synchrony up and down within the firm. And fundamentally, it ties back to the first item that we said, do you know where you want to go? Scott?
Exactly. I mean, that's critical. It's cyclical. Again, as Matt said, we look forward to seeing you all in Chicago in November. Thanks for the opportunity to chat, Emma.
Matt, Scott, thank you so much. That was fantastic, I'm sure, and a really great way to kind of keep that 6 simple questions. So thank you for sharing. Harry, do you mind perhaps stepping in and giving your thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Emma. So it's a pleasure to join this panel today. And as the others stated, very excited about the opportunity to learn more at the conference coming up in November. I think my approach to creating a strong foundation maybe is built upon sort of the school of hard knocks. I thought the points of having relevancy, believability, and unique was very, very on point. From a believability standpoint, many out there, due to recent experiences with other technological advances, are maybe still fighting that these things like autonomous vehicles and others, will actually ever get here one day. But the truth is, they're here today, and the marketplace will continue to shift and expand at a very rapid pace. So it is relevant. These are issues that are happening today. At AIG, we had a client visiting our office last week, a large client, and they have a huge auto exposure with us, and they are looking at opportunities for autonomous vehicles in closed driving ecosystems. So these solutions are out there today. They may just not be as broad as what others think they could be. And it is unique from the standpoint that the government has adopted, at least in the United States, kind of a policy relative to the early stages of involvement of letting the various industry stakeholders shape policy, shape regulations. So they have guidelines that they're looking for the marketplace to follow relative to the manufacturing community, the insurance community, and other state regulators, but there isn't really any clear mandate or regulation on the use of these future technologies in the case at least of autonomous vehicles yet. There's a framework, but there's not a final document. It's kind of we will create it as we go. So I kind of look at where we are with the exciting technological changes that are coming in kind of a view of what's happening today and what needs to be done today, and then what companies need to be thinking about in the future. So today, I think understanding the right partners that need to be made in the insurance space, understanding all of the different stakeholders involved in this technological transformation is key. Creating a foundation where this data can be shared in a practical and simple way. Data sharing is a big topic right now, but it is also a big question mark due to the multiple formats that data is available. And basically just seeing the marketplace have an adoption rate for these new technologies that is significant and measurable. And I think a recent example, at least in the automotive space, specifically in trucking, was this year's enactment of the electronic logging device mandate. Not a driverless truck by any stretch of the imagination, but just mandating to the marketplace that commercial trucks, with very few exceptions, need to implement a new technology solution universally across their fleet. There was a lot of resistance and concern about that. So the adoption levels of this technology, it'll remain to be seen, and it's going to happen in a transitional way. People are not going to just give up their vehicles they have today and shift 100% to autonomous vehicles. So there'll be a gradual transition of the various levels of autonomy. So really, as you look towards the future, how do you get out in front of these issues? And the key thing is to start if you haven't already. There must be an incredible amount of preparation. At AIG, we've assembled a team that's hard at work at looking at all the various stakeholders that could be impacted, whether it's manufacturers of the vehicles, the sensors, the software, how our clients will perceive these things, what is the role of the regulator, and then even outside sources like the Teamsters and others that, are not real happy about this perception that there won't be a need for drivers anymore. There's pros and cons relative to the impact of these solutions. Some of the stats say there could be as much as a 90% improvement in safety, fatalities, accidents, etc., with the use of fully autonomous vehicles. But with that comes the major concern of cybersecurity and liability shifting. Other outcomes would be, would this really reduce the complexity of working in an insurance claims environment? I think the knee-jerk response would be it should be very simple because we don't have to worry about driver error. We just download the data and we see what happens. But there really aren't too many precedents on this, and so there could be actually a totally opposite result, which would be a much more complex claims situation, with the finger pointing being all the way down to the sensor manufacturer versus the automotive manufacturer. So I guess in summary, the statement would be that the future is here. Various levels of these exciting technologies, whether it be in autonomous vehicles or wearables or other IoT sensor devices, they're here today, and the sooner that companies can start thinking about this and preparing for it, the better. So I think those would be my comments as a high-level view.
Thank you, Harry. Those were some fantastic ones, and I like that of just getting started as well. A reminder, if you've got any questions for our fantastic panelists, please enter them into the question function of the webinar system. I know I've already got quite a few, but make sure you get them in so we can get them asked. Michelle, if you've got any thoughts.
Yes, thanks for having me today, Emma. At Connected Insurance, looking forward to seeing all of you. I'll be speaking to building your internal innovation engine. So a little more detailed than the topic we have today, but in preparing my thoughts for the webinar in terms of how do you build an innovation-ready foundation, thought a lot about the bold commitments that start at the leadership level. So there's about 5 assertions that leaders willing to embark on the innovation journey need to start with. And here at American Family, we started with a clear cultural expectation that it's everyone's accountability to innovate. So several years ago, we revised our mission, vision, values. We even created a one AmFam culture statement is what we call it. And the word innovation is found scattered throughout. But basically, it's about empowering the people closest to the customer pains and problems that they face on a daily basis. So the first thing we did on our journey was just start to expose employees to different concepts such as lean and continuous improvement. There are various boot camps, training, accelerators to build their knowledge and mindset around the experimental design concept. And then soon thereafter, you started to see the behaviors follow. I feel really strongly that building this foundational knowledge is just as important as getting results in the beginning. You're trying to build your internal entrepreneurs, your intrapreneurs, if you will. And so in doing so, you need to recognize those who are doing good work, demonstrating the appropriate behaviors, and basically sharing the lessons learned with others so they can know that failure, placing bets, things like that are okay to do in this new transformative culture. About 12 to 18 months ago, when I brought the innovation competency to our product line, specifically here in commercial lines and farm ranch, we spent time defining what innovation even means to our business and our product line. So separating things like core versus transformative innovation, which roles would be held by which areas, who provides consultancy and expertise, who owns the actual business decisions. Figuring out those roles and clearly separating that was very critical to our early success. Goes without saying, you need to get to know your customer. So through empathy, through experimentation, you need to almost deconstruct what you thought was once relevant to your customers and find new ways to reinvest those resources. Of course, letting the customer tell you along the way where to place those bets. As a leader, you need to show a willingness to make low-stake decisions and even mistakes quickly. So what you want to be careful of is perpetual experimentation. It is still important to set deadlines and to expect answers. Evidence-based decisions, well-grounded in hypotheses and also well-aligned to your strategy or your competitive advantage, those have to be your anchors throughout this journey. And then where we're just starting to turn the corner is being willing to go deeper by actually changing organizational structures and our processes for how we do work. So things like metered funding, different prioritization and project portfolios, ways to really carve out a safe space for this type of innovation work. And then last but not least is relentlessly building and establishing strong partnerships across our enterprise. So not only do you get lessons learned, but you'll find efficiencies and scale. And a lot of the problems our customers have are going to be across multiple product lines, and you want to keep that holistic lens. So it takes a lot of work and time and dedication, but this will always pay off in the end. And so it's something that is really important to start early on. So in short, this is not a one-size-fits-all by any means, and it's definitely going to take time and patience, but it's a really exciting place to be. And as Harry said, the future's here, it's not going away, and so we have to learn how to adapt in the most agile way we can.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Michelle. Absolutely. It is, I think, about doing absolutely everything you can at this point, which is wonderful. Brian, can I pass over to you, please?
Absolutely, and thanks for having me today, guys. I'm pleased to be speaking with you all. I'll keep my kind of initial comments here relatively brief as I think about this as a little bit of a teaser for what we'll all be speaking about at the conference, and looking forward very much to that coming up in November. So as a little bit of a background, CSA Insurance Group is a AAA insurer, and we ultimately write AAA branded products, primarily home and auto insurance, in 23 states and Washington, D.C. We strive to serve the insurance needs of our membership base, and across the United States, AAA has nearly 60 million members. And to date, we've primarily thought about that in the kind of personal lines segments. But we recognize that kind of as we look at this insurance landscape, we see a lot of changes on the horizon. We see the autonomous wave of and drastic changes to driving, personal driving, and that you have a lengthy debate about the timeline associated with that. But we see even shorter term changes in the way people ultimately use those primarily personal assets. Over the last 10 years, we have grappled with how to deal with things like car sharing and home sharing, and ultimately people using assets in different ways than they had for the previous 100 years. So as we think about that, some of those changes, and we think about these in terms of both challenges and opportunities. I mentioned a couple things that could be seen as challenges, but also very much could be seen as opportunities as well, as we look at kind of what makes sense for our members. I think somebody may have touched on this a moment ago, but I think about the IoT landscape as well. And as we look at the influx of new data points that ultimately make insurance much more tailored, much more actuarially sound. And so that these are all sort of topics that I think about as sort of precursors and inputs to the need for an innovative culture at insurance companies today. I would suggest that CSA Insurance Group is relatively new to our sort of innovation journey as I think about it. And we sort of lay it out in three different categories. We think about first, continuous improvement. Continuous improvement is the responsibility of everybody in the company to constantly be making products better, more customer focused, and ultimately thinking about the process improvement that it's everyone's responsibility in the company. We think about sustaining innovation and thinking about this from the perspective of adjacencies to our existing lines of insurance, or radical changes to our existing lines of insurance. At the conference, I'll be going into a lot more detail on some specific concepts that we're focused on in the sustaining innovation category. And then we think about disruptive innovations. I mentioned things like autonomous vehicles that could have disruptive impacts upon our business, and the impact that we could have on the broader AAA member base with disruptive products that drastically change about how people interact, how people, how ultimately our members get from point A to point B, how they use their homes, etc. And then I think there's also a little bit of a question that insurance companies need to think about as building up an innovative culture around, is this a centralized, is innovation a centralized function? Is this something that spreads throughout the entire organization? How do you ultimately kind of, what do you put your guardrails on how you want to innovate as an organization? And then, how do you ultimately execute upon that? And at CSA Insurance Group, we've actually kind of done it both ways. And I mentioned we're relatively new to this journey. A little over 2 years ago, we hired a new Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer, Debbie Brackeen. And ultimately what we've done there is build up a function that directly kind of helps guide the organization, as well as ultimately execute on individual concepts, bringing to market, piloting these concepts, building them out. I mentioned a moment ago, and I'll get a little bit more detail on this, we trained our entire organization. We put every single employee in CSA Insurance Group, has a few thousand employees. We put every single one of them through a full day training session where we ultimately laid out the principles and the methodology behind lean innovation and tailored a program ultimately very specific to what we felt was best for our employees, particularly around the continuous improvement category. And then when we think about sort of the components of what the strategy and innovation organization does at CSA Insurance Group, we focus on a variety of different areas, but I'll call out a few of them here. And one of them is ultimately how can we change our strategy? How can we ultimately impact the business from the CEO level down to focus on innovation and focus on new products and services to ultimately service our members across our footprint. We think about kind of this from a cultural and a hiring shift standpoint. We've been around for over 100 years as an organization, and we haven't had AAA historically has been a very innovative organization. We started out and ultimately created things like the stop signs originated from AAA and the Highway Patrol. But that was a long time ago, and the last few decades, we haven't had our eye on the ball as much as we could have potentially. And so our organization is ultimately thinking about how can we shift our mindset, and how can we ultimately hire differently, and as well as train folks in different ways to thinking about innovation. We focus on partnerships, building out strategic partnerships that make the most sense to align ourselves with like-minded companies to ultimately get products and services to our members. We think about building out a new venture capital fund to ultimately do similar lens on that, except with investment component. And then we build products and new services from the ground up. So I'm really looking forward to the conference and getting into a little bit more detail on this stuff. But thanks for having me today.
Thank you very much, Brian, for your thoughts. And I agree, I'm looking very forward to the conference to hear a little bit more detail on that. We've got some great questions coming through, so make sure you kind of get yours in. And we've just got a final panelist. So Jacqueline, if we could get your comments, that would be wonderful.
Great, thank you so much, and also looking forward to the event in November. So just a little bit on MetLife and how we're thinking about innovation overall, and my role in strategy. I also look a lot at what's happening externally and would like to share those thoughts as well. So MetLife has been going through a transformation for the last few years. We created a new strategy about 2 years ago, and as a company overall, really every function, every business has been going through a transformation. And when we think of innovation, it's really at a very broad scale, thinking about what does change mean throughout the company. And one thing that I'd like to share is our CEO has been talking consistently about an ownership mindset And that's really the way we've been thinking about innovation and change. If everyone in the company can really take hold of this concept of having an ownership mindset, really thinking about if your name was above the door when you walk in every day, if it was your business, how would you treat things? Meaning, how would you think about ways to do things better? Don't just accept this is the way it's always been done in the past. Move away from that status quo type of mentality. So really trying to embed that ownership mindset in the way that we approach every decision, every way of looking at our current processes, our current business, the way we interact with our customers, and that really is embedded in everything that we're thinking about. Then when I think about innovation and what's really driving that across our industry and the impact that it's having, I think it's really driven by two things, and one is technology, and the other is customer experience, and these two dynamics are really playing very closely off of one another. Technology in the sense that just the rapid pace of change that we're seeing across technology. Sometimes I hear the term new technology, which is interesting in that a lot of the technology that we're talking about today isn't really new at all. These are decades old types of technology that has just innovated over and over again, and just the pace of change that we're seeing them being used in different applications is just such a rapid pace right now that it's just exponential. And then that's really driving customer experience in that customers are experiencing technology in all facets of their life. And when we think about the dynamics that have been created by these e-commerce and digital giants that we all interact with day to day, a customer is so used to interacting and thinking about their day, the way they interact with their social media, the way they interact with their Amazon purchases, that why wouldn't everything they interact with be as simple and convenient, as easy as that? So those two forces are really at play now in the way customers are thinking about how they want to experience their insurance. So that's really one of the things that we're trying to observe closely and understand what this new future, and I think someone has already been mentioned that the future is really now. These platforms and ecosystems are here, and it's how we live day to day. So how do we really think about that from an insurance context? So when we think about what we're doing at MetLife then to balance this and to focus on innovation, we've really tried to ramp up what I'll call our innovation ecosystem over the last few years. We've had already a long relationship of interacting with VCs and startups, and we have had a number of very interesting relationships over the past few years. A few years ago, we started an innovation lab in Singapore, and we are there creating brand new concepts that we're testing in the market. This year in the U.S., we launched a digital accelerator program with the help of Techstars, who has a great program in place. And we have 10 startups that are coming in and working with our businesses to really understand what the MetLife problems, needs are that we're trying to solve, and we're helping these startups understand and work through their new businesses. We really try to embed a culture of test and learn, and this is something that is definitely, we've seen a rapid increase in this over the last few years, where there had been that mentality of let's make sure everything is completely right and buttoned up before you step into something new, and we've really moved away from that to how can we just put something out there in a controlled way, understand it, tweak things as needed, and really look at the impact. A couple of the interesting ones that I'd like to share with everyone today. We have an interesting application of blockchain that we're experimenting with, and this is something that we're doing out of our Singapore lab. We've introduced a solution called Vitana, which is using blockchain to access pregnant women in Singapore and look at whether or not insure them against having gestational diabetes. And everything on the back end is being done through a blockchain ledger. Very interesting, very innovative in the health space, something that we just recently launched. And the idea here is it's on a very small scale, but how do we look at this as a way to learn and understand how this technology could have multiple applications? And this is a small use case, but is it something that we can then look at and deploy in other ways elsewhere? We're using other innovation type applications. We have a software solution called cogito that's being done in our call centers, where we're using a software to listen for emotion in calls, to understand whether or not there needs to be a cue to a call center rep to change up the conversation. Different types of technology. We have multiple applications of AI and RPA being used, and it's really about having these small test cases where you can then see how we could then deploy on a larger scale. So I think overall, as we think about innovation, we're really thinking about, again, how do we change as an organization, and how do we consistently keep the customer and the customer experience top of mind. We have a lot of focus right now on how we think about our products, and how are we thinking about creating products that are easy for customers to understand. How do we think about offering more than just products? There's a lot of I would say, a movement or a shift right now in understanding that customers are really interested in more than just products. It's really about an entire experience or solution. So keeping this top of mind and really making sure that it's embedded in all of our organizational dynamics is a key focus area for us. Thanks very much. Emma, I'll pass it back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jacqueline. That sounds very, very exciting. I'm really interested in that call center technology to detect emotion. I think that's so cool. Thank you very much for our panelists. That was wonderful, and some really interesting thoughts there. I'm going to dive straight into some of these questions because there is some absolutely fantastic ones. The first thing, I think, is something that you've all kind of touched on to some extent, but is, I think, probably top of mind to a lot of carriers that are looking to innovate. And that's the question is, how do you engage key players in the organization to really change and shift a company's culture, and how do you help that disseminate throughout the company? So I know there's been some mention or a number of sort of strategies mentioned, but I'd be keen to get your thoughts across the panel of who within an organization are really the key people to be on board for an innovation agenda. Of course, innovation takes the entire organization pulling in the same direction. So how do you actually go about doing that when you're potentially sitting in one organization or one department that's really keen, but you're looking to really scale that throughout the company, or you're looking to move certain teams that perhaps aren't as on board? Are there any kind of little strategies that you're able to use? Perhaps I'll throw that to Matt and Scott first to hear within AmTrust.
I'll start. So Emma, I think one of the things that's critical with that is, look, and let's be frank. I mean, politics matter, and turf matters, and your ability to sort of swim within a firm matters. And so if you want to try and create an innovation theme that and think that you can do it in a bubble and be successful, that's going to be a challenge. So you heard Michelle talking about from the top down and getting the buy-in from the very, very top. And so if you've established that your firm is an innovation ready firm, then you know that you've got the buy-in at the top. And then you just need to simply think about how you need to communicate your goals and objectives throughout the firm so that other related parties can understand what you're trying to accomplish, how it can ultimately benefit them, and doing so in a manner that's allowing you to swim within the firm and not get into shark-infested waters. Scott, anything to add?
Yeah, really well said. I think, Emma, what's one of the most important things, or let's just say it can make it easier, is if you're part of a very innovative company. Matt and I are lucky enough to be so. So engaging in innovation is an easy do here, but outside of that, and even within our company, the only thing I'd add is co-opting others, having multiple owners to work gets buy-in faster than anything else.
An interesting point. Thank you both. I am glad that you've referenced the fact of the impact that working with an organization that is so innovation focused. I know a lot of our audience probably are wishing their organization was similarly minded, but there's some good ideas there. Harry, what about yourself?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I echo the comments about expanding collaboration getting multiple levels of the organization involved as early as possible. I think one of the dangers in the innovation world is that there are so many new and exciting things that are available today or in the process of becoming available that a key challenge is trying to keep focused on solutions or technologies that really have the best value for your organization. It's easy to fall into a dangerous scenario of, I never met a technology pilot that I didn't like. So you need to be very focused on what you're trying to achieve. You need to be fair to the vendor community and not to set unrealistic expectations so you don't have the potential of them saying that you're crying wolf, if you will. And finally, and I think frankly most importantly, is people in the innovation world in today's business environment, and AIG is a member of this like many companies are, it's really key to pinpoint where you're going to be making your investments. And if you're in a fact-finding role, that's exciting, but at some point there's going to be a funding question about the solution or solutions that will be potentially looked at much more closely. So, do yourself a favor and build a strong business case and get economic or budget approval, or at least preliminary approval as to what these solutions would entail in a trial basis, because it can often be frustrating if you grab onto an initiative and run with it and you think it really has amazing potential, but you didn't get that budget approved to execute, then, you can set yourself up for frustration. So at the end of the day, you got to follow the money. Someone has to pay for these solutions and get those issues addressed early on versus, having a strategy of hope that, they'll be solved somehow in the future. Get out in front of those issues would be my advice.
Thank you very much, Harry. There's some excellent bits of advice in there. I like that. Michelle, I know you had mentioned earlier your kind of the importance of a top-down dedication to innovation. Have you got any additional kind of thoughts around that, or kind of the tips around making that spread throughout the entire organization?
Yeah, I'll just chime in with find your allies. Basically, go where you are wanted. There's obviously going to be those who move more quickly along the innovation maturity curve, if you will. And so instead of continually hitting brick walls or challenges or roadblocks, go where you're wanted, find those use cases, get some quick wins under your belt so you can then use that as your PR moving forward. Another thing that we've had going on for about the last year or so here at American Family is an innovation advisory consortium made up of leaders from across the organization, both affiliate partners and internally. And so it's basically just our platform to share all the latest happenings going on, challenges, commiserate a little bit. And it's been a really supportive network for leaders like myself who are trying to blaze the trail for the company.
Fantastic. Really good thought. Brian, what about yourself?
Yeah, I think there's been some really good points brought up. I happen to be kind of finding myself nodding along the way here from the politic angle, from focusing on the right things, from following the money. I think there's many different paths to ultimately build success in this space, and I'll just share one brief component of how CSA has thought about it, and that's that we sensed very early on that our organization ultimately had a strong willingness and open-mindedness toward innovation, but not necessarily a clear understanding of how to execute on that. And so we also so that was kind of half of the coin. The other half of the coin was that we realized that part-time innovation is really, really hard. So what we ultimately stood up was a program called we kind of deemed internally as Velocity, and what Velocity is ultimately meant to do is take folks from around the organization for a period of anywhere from 3 to 6 and maybe even 9 months away from their basic job, away from their standard job in claims or in service or in IT, and ultimately give them an opportunity to be a founder of something. Give them an opportunity to ultimately, with blessings from an innovation board or what we call our growth board, give them the opportunity to focus on a particular customer problem and ultimate solution. Really get out there, interact with end customers, work with our policyholders, and dedicate themselves to an individual concept for a given period of time. Ultimately, kind of constantly going back and seeking approval to continue. But this engine has been very successful for us, and we've learned a great deal about it in the last year or so we've been operating it. So many different paths to innovation. That path that has worked for CSAA, and I think there's just many different paths.
Good point there. Always many different areas. So, Jacqueline, if I could throw that question to you as well, any thoughts or tips?
Sure. A lot has been said, and I don't know if there's too much else to add. But the one small point that I'll make is, I think there's often a misconception that innovation should sit within just a technology function, or should be a digital function or digital technology problem to solve. So I think that's the one piece that if anyone is just launching into innovation, think of that as there's enablers, and then I think it's already been said, and I agree with the fact that there's you really need to have business sponsorship around these things, because everything costs money and there needs to be money in budgets. So think of it in the way that it has to be, don't want to use the word problem, but an opportunity for the entire organization. So it isn't something that needs to sit within one particular area, but is something that should really be a shared responsibility. So I think having early on as much of a senior level sponsor as can be there, I think is really crucial in driving innovation. So having that business sponsorship, because that also has been said by another panelist, you need to create use cases to have some of these ideas and examples put into action, and you have that really through a business sponsorship. And then technology and digital really play an enormous role, but it shouldn't be their sole responsibility to drive that across an organization. It really has to be a collaborative and joint effort of folks within multiple businesses and functions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. There's some great ideas there. I'm going to move on to the next question, which again is something that's kind of been mentioned, I think, by everyone, but is so critical. So obviously you are putting customers at the heart, and customer-driven innovation is key. But we've got a great question here: is how do you know what customers want? Or I guess I would add, do customers know what customers want? To kind of get a flip in the answers, I'm going to go back to Jacqueline first. So how do you kind of go about knowing what will be valuable for customers, or what will kind of add additional value, when I imagine there's so many different perspectives and avenues to go down, and sometimes customers aren't 100% aware of what they would value from their insurance carrier?
I think it's a great question, and I think understanding what customers want, and I touched on it a little bit, is it's really understanding the way customers are interacting day to day with just how they go about their days, and the way they're interacting with other things, other financial services, other decisions that they're making, points that they're, that stages that they're in their lives, and really understanding that dynamic. So I think the one element is just, how do we crack this very old notion that insurance is just so complicated and no one understands it, and it's just something that customers don't want to deal with, and shift that mindset into, this is something that is clearly addressing needs, and how do we get customers interested and willing to give some of their mind share to understand and learn more about it. And I think it really starts with how do you go to where the customer is, in terms of they shouldn't have to seek out something that they need. So how do you find more opportunities to be where the customer is? When you find that customer, how do you ensure that you are speaking to them in a way that's clear and understandable. Products should not be so complicated that they're known to just not be able to be understood. How do you make the entire experience something that's easy and enjoyable? I know everyone knows when they have those moments in a buying experience where you step back and say, "Oh wow, that was so easy. That was something enjoyable." How do we make an experience of buying insurance and interacting and using insurance that type of experience? So I think it's really about understanding the underlying customer need and then being where they are, interacting with them in a way that they want to be interacted with, which is the way they're interacting with everything else in their day-to-day life.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jacqueline. And Brian, what about yourself?
I think this is there's a very underlying question on this, which is, who is your customer? And I'll answer it for CSAA, and our customers are AAA members. And I think that when the natural inclination is ask your customers what they want, right? Talk to your customers, etc. But I think there's an inherent flaw sometimes in that approach, and that is that think about yourself. If you're asked by somebody, do you like X, or would you buy Y? You're not sure. People are naturally pleasing and will say absolutely I will, but that isn't necessarily always the most helpful. So one thing that we try to do at CSAA is ultimately get a demonstration of value. So more than just an ask of a customer, like would you do this or would you do that, but really ultimately asking them to demonstrate some value. So whether that is signing up for a form, or whether that's providing an email address, or whether that's ultimately committing dollars, or whatever the case is, but ultimately getting some demonstration of future behavior, of something that we could ultimately plan against. Because I think that the underlying question is a really good one, and that is, how are you truly understanding that this is something customer wants? And I think it's insufficient to just ask them straight up. So I think demonstration of value is a pretty crucial component as we think about it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Michelle?
Yeah, I'll just echo what Brian and Jacqueline are speaking to. It's a little bit of art and science, I would say. So I think it's the sweet spot where data and information, technology, and then ultimately customer behavior. What are they actually doing out in the wild that we can observe and provide additional value for them? So removing friction, making things easier, making their life easier. So more just taking that offensive stance instead of always playing the defense. So just watching what they do, and not just in our industry, but elsewhere, as Jacqueline said, to get different themes and focus areas so you can be one step ahead of them at all times.
Excellent. And Harry, what about at AIG?
Well, just to continue the theme, I think really getting to know your customer and their needs and their expectations. I think a very good test for that would be whenever your internal stakeholders are using words like I think and I believe and I'm pretty sure, then you just really don't know what your customer wants, and you really need to nail that down very, very clearly and early on, and challenge the customer all through the process or other stakeholders to make sure that opinions do not change over time, because there's a lot of moving targets and a lot of stimuli that happen to all business relationships, and things do change, and that's not a bad thing, but you just need to be open and transparent and hope that your client will be, and challenge them to be. I think the other area would be to save time, knowing that there are certain customers that you're very engaged with and others maybe not as much, would be to choose the path of least resistance for customers that are true advocates of your service, and engage with them to get their feedback to test your hypotheses about what would be marketable. And then also, maybe open it up to focus groups or other types of client advisory boards, or, there's many versions of those in the marketplace. But get as much good info from your best customers as you can, but don't ignore others as well, because there could be, different points of view from a broader spectrum. So just be open, communicate, and challenge the responses that you get over time, with the understanding that they could change. And if they do, that's okay, because the total environment is changing every day with these new technologies.
Fantastic. The good points again. Matt, Scott, anything to add to the prior comments?
Well, there's not a lot to add. Those were all really good comments. I think the obvious is every customer wants to have it easy to be able to work with you. So that's always going to be a fundamental. Outside of that, I think testing is critical. And you could test live and have your customers learn, sometimes in a frustrating way, the new process or technology you're employing, or you can do it in things like focus groups. Matt, what would you add?
I like that testing comment. It adds a tactile or a feel element to it, and it certainly makes sure that whatever you're focused on from an innovation perspective is going to meet that relevancy standard that I talked about earlier. Just two last quick comments. I'd say the challenges of meeting the needs of the customer are twofold. One, the customer's changing, right? If you define your agent as your customer, well, they're going through massive changes right now, and in terms of new digital players that are emerging, and new wholesale opportunities that are out there. If you view the policyholder as your customer, well, they're changing too. And you heard about Brian talk about some of those. You heard Harry talk about driverless cars. So obviously there's all sorts of changing definitions of the customer. So that complicates it. And secondly, I don't think always the customers know what they need or what they want, because they don't even know what's available. So I think they know what they like, and so we have to look at what's available, what could be possible, and then to Scott's point, tease it out there with them and get feedback and avoid. I think it was Jacqueline talking about you want to avoid some of the crowdsourcing or the bias that can become inherent in the process.
Fantastic. Some very valid thoughts there as well at the end on the validity. So thank you, everyone. That is unfortunately all the time we've got today for questions. There's loads more. I'm sorry to everyone's questions that we didn't get to, but I think there were some really great perspectives and thoughts from our panel today. Remember, if this was valuable or of interest or is relevant for you or your team, we are going to be continuing these conversations in a lot more detail at Connected Insurance USA in November in Chicago. Get in touch with me if you'd like to chat through, but we will be again hearing from these six wonderful panelists. So Matt, Scott, Harry, Michelle, Brian, and Jacqueline, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you in November in Chicago.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.